6 months after the war began, Ukraine is celebrating its Independence Day, fighting for its freedom. The Russian invasion has shattered peace in Europe, led to widespread suffering and caused a humanitarian crisis with more than 12 million people displaced. And the impact is being felt in every corner of the world. It's sent energy prices soaring, slowed the global economy and worsened famine in Africa and the Middle East. Hugo Bashega is the BBC's correspondent in Ukraine.
We're here on the main street in the centre of Kyiv, not far from Maidan Square, Independence Square, where big political protests, political revolutions have happened in this country. And usually the military holds a massive military parade to celebrate Independence Day. Not today. What we're seeing here is a display of Russian seized, destroyed military vehicles and tanks. There is a ban on public events here in Kyiv today and tomorrow, so there won't be any big celebrations. And that is because authorities fear Russia could use this occasion to launch attacks against cities across the country. Last night, President Zelensky warned of dangerous provocations from Russia. And also today, it is the 6th month anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Thousands of people have been killed, cities have been destroyed, a third of the population has been displaced. The conflict seems to be at a deadlock. And there is no prospect of any kind of peace negotiations happening anytime soon.
Given the symbolism of today, how seriously are people taking those security concerns?
I've got to say that people, especially here in Kyiv, even though the city is away from the front lines, they're now used to this threat that anything can happen. I think there is a sense of defiance. People say they will keep fighting for the independence, for the sovereignty of this country. There is apprehension, of course, because of the warnings, but there isn't fear.
Hugo Bashega reporting from Kyiv. The magnitude of this crisis today is staggering, and it all began suddenly and swiftly.
Ukraine's leaders tried today to reassure their population.
The best friend for enemies, that is panic in our country.
Tensions are escalating, with shelling reported this morning.
The war thing will not happen, but be ready.
War has returned to Europe
after a huge Russian military offensive.
The invasion of Ukraine has begun.
Обстоятельства требуют от нас решительных.
Шановні громадяни України, сьогодні вранці.
Up to 5 million people may try to flee.
Russian troops want to seize the capital, Kyiv.
Volodymyr Zelensky has refused America's offer to evacuate him.
Russia is now in full control of significant parts of Ukrainian territory.
Ukrainian authorities are saying the plant has been seized by Russian military forces.
A message from the International Red Cross in Mariupol speaks of an increasingly dire and desperate situation, a city reduced to ruins by constant Russian bombardment.
Russia's defense ministry has declared a ceasefire to allow residents of Mariupol to evacuate.
Russian forces are not observing the ceasefire. The city is without water and power and is running out of food.
So many are trying to get out. They are overwhelming the transport system.
An evacuation convoy has managed to leave the key port of Mariupol.
Сотрудничество в рамках союзного государства, а на совещании...
Охуеть! Ебать, блядь, ебани, сука, их рот.
Zelensky said his country should accept that it will not become a member of the NATO military alliance.
People are already referring to this as a war crime.
The word children was written outside clearly in letters that you could see. 300 people are are believed to have died in that attack.
For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
Ukrainian forces have retaken the entire Kyiv region.
Russian forces are being accused of committing mass atrocities.
Hundreds of bodies and mass graves in the town of Bucha.
Some with their hands and feet tied, left in the streets.
Volodymyr Zelensky has accused Russia of genocide.
The unthinkable has happened here.
Either you help us now, or your help will come too late.
They've struck the flagship Moskva.
Ukraine sending a legendary warship to the bottom of the Black Sea.
Vladimir Putin declaring victory over the besieged port city of Mariupol.
Russian forces are reported to be trying to storm Azovstal steelworks.
The Ukrainians have refused to give up their positions. They know full well they could die down there in these steelworks.
The battle for the city of Mariupol appears to be over. Russia holds the entire Ukrainian port, its largest gain of the war.
It is 100 days since Russia launched its full-scale invasion.
Zelensky says Russia controls 20% of his entire country.
Russia has claimed full control of Luhansk, one of the two regions of the Donbass at the heart of the war in Ukraine.
This is an agreement for the world.
A Russian missile launched from the Black Sea could undermine the landmark deal.
There are calls for an urgent humanitarian investigation after an attack on a prisoner of war camp.
Among those killed, Ukrainian fighters who made their last stand defending the Azovstal steel plant in besieged Mariupol.
Europe's largest nuclear plant completely out of control. The alarming report from the UN's nuclear chief.
This is a serious hour.
Today, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has made a defiant speech marking Independence Day, saying his country will recapture Crimea and the occupied eastern regions of Ukraine.
A new nation appeared in the world on February 24th at 4 in the morning. It was not born, but reborn. A nation that did not cry, scream, or take fright. One that did not flee, did not give up, and did not forget. What for us is the end of the war? We used to say peace. Now we say victory.
Let's bring in Inna Sovson, an MP in Ukraine's parliament. She joins us from Kyiv. Inna Sovson, happy Ukrainian Independence Day. How are you feeling about this milestone, given that the notion of freedom itself in Ukraine is under siege?
Thanks for the congratulations. We indeed feel festive, yet at the same time very cautious about the situation in Ukraine today. As you know, there are many information claiming that Putin can launch extra missiles attack all over Ukraine. So lots of people actually live in big cities so that not to be victims of those attacks. But anyways, regardless of that, I think this is the year where we celebrate this holiday, and that is where people are most appreciative of having this independence. I was just a couple of days ago, I went to a shop where they sell Ukrainian traditional clothing, and I was just amazed with how many people were there in the shop. I actually had to queue in line before buying a traditional Ukrainian shirt, and I think that speaks about something. That speaks about people trying to reconnect with our roots in order to build a better future for our children.
So you're saying despite that sense of nationalism, people are anticipating that there could be a Russian attack before midnight to mark this symbolic day?
Yes, definitely. We were hearing that information both from the American intelligence, but also from the Ukrainian intelligence. Lots of people were advised to leave cities, because for Putin, those big dates are important. He's a psychopath, so he cares about those strange things. So yeah, him trying to spoil us the Independence Day kind of makes sense in this situation. So yes, people are taking extra cautionary measures in order to keep safe on this day.
We know that thousands of people in Ukraine have been killed, many millions displaced. How has that affected your country's ability to defend itself?
Well, I tell you this, and I'm not bragging, but for real, I think our spirit is actually growing stronger with every single day. There are still people who are volunteering to go to the army. There are still lines of people who are volunteering to go to the army. They're not taken into the army because there simply is not enough weapons for them to work with. People are still ready to fight. People are still committed. Just literally half an hour ago, I watched some pictures in social media from Nova Kakhovka, which is a small town very close to Crimea. It was occupied the first few hours of the big war, and they have set up a big Ukrainian flag in the big building in the town center. That speaks something about the ability to fight and the willingness to fight, even in most terrible situations in those occupied territories.
In the early days of the war, the Russian offensive was let down by poor intelligence, substandard equipment, inexperience, and yet here we are 6 months on. How formidable is the Russian military right now?
Well, do remember that after all, Russian army is the second biggest army in the world. And I do not believe that there is any single army in the world, apart from maybe American army, that would be able to hold to the pressure of the big army such as Russian. We are holding. We are actually keeping our ground. Russians have not moved far, a lot since for the last month. And I think actually the new strategy that the Ukrainian leadership, military leadership is employing right now, where they're destroying the depots, the warehouses with Russian weapon and ammunition, that is actually making a big difference. And I think if we continue this way, we would soon be able to, make Russian army not the second biggest army in the world, but I don't know, 10th, 15th. Doesn't matter to us. But trust me, there are some successes on the field. We're not seeing the battle line moving that much, but still the fact that we're destroying lots of Russian ammunition is crucially important, because then it cannot be used against us, against our military men and women, but also against civilians.
Tell us what it's like for you as a parliamentarian, as a woman who's staying in Kyiv, to see out this conflict. What is it like trying to govern in this environment?
Well, first personal comment, me as a woman, I have to wake up every morning and to text my boyfriend to ask if he is alive and well and safe, because he's over there fighting in the war. And I'm, of course, constantly concerned about how he is doing. So it is difficult. And trust me, we do get all emotional at some point. But what I know for sure is, in order for me to help save his life, in order to build a life for my son, in order to preserve the lives of my parents, what I need to do is to do what my job is, and that is to speak to the world, to explain what is happening here, and to help our president, our other members of parliament, our government, to build and sustain the coalition that is helping Ukraine defend ourselves against Russia. And then we are not only defending ourselves, but of course the very principles that the international order is based on. Sorry, I have to do something because we get an air raid alert now. So if you hear the sound, that's
what are you hearing? Just describe for us what you're hearing.
Yeah, I'm hearing that in my in my AirPods. That's slightly annoying, because we do all have the app on our phones, which says when there is an air raid alert. And now there is an air raid alert. I think that is the second or the third during this day. Should we let you go? Are you safe where you are right now? I think I'm safe. I'm slightly outside of the big city, so should be okay.
But this is the reality of life in Ukraine right now, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And we do hear that, 4 in the morning, 8 in the morning, middle of the day, whatever, you never know when that is coming. But in a way, we are trying to get used to that. I think the most problematic issue that is being mostly discussed right now in Ukraine is September 1st is coming, and that is the new school year over here in Ukraine. And the major issue is how do we allow our kids to go back to school, and what they will do if they hear air raid alerts. And that is a big discussion so far. But other than that, I think we're trying to navigate around it.
Ina Sovson, it's been great to have you on the program. Thanks so much for joining us. Stay safe.
Thank you so much.
Well, Taras Toplia was the lead singer in a well-known band before the war. He swapped his microphone for a gun after the invasion and has been serving on the Eastern Front with his battalion. Tonight, he's on R&R in the capital, Kyiv. He joined us early to tell us what life is like on the front line.
With my friend, with my colleagues, we are continuing to working, to doing our job like a paramedical squad. And it looks like every day you are trying to do your best and to realize your main aim to save the lives. So I have saw a lot of wounded soldiers. Me with my colleagues, we are rescued. We are saved the lives of a lot of soldiers, and we will continue to do this because those soldiers, those brothers in arms, it is somebody's husbands, somebody's sons, somebody's fathers. We are counterattacking, and we are step by step trying to reinforce, trying to recapture Ukrainian cities. So what is happening now, not only just on the north outskirts of Kharkiv, but totally at all of Ukraine.
Have you come face-to-face with Russian battalions, you and your comrades? I wonder what that face-to-face meeting is like when you come to meet a Russian soldier.
We see that Russian troops are not well motivated. And a lot of them don't understand why they are here in Ukraine. But they, like a zombie, I don't know how to explain this. They just continue to kill Ukrainians with low morale, without understanding why they're here, why they're on Ukrainian land. But they're doing this because just Putin said, and it's unbelievable how it can be in present times. And it's another and another. When the battalion attacks and killed 10 Russians, the next 10 Russians comes after them.
You are now separated from your family. What is that like for you? Where are they? Are they safe?
My family in United States, and they are in safety place. They are living with my mother and stepfather. And they are preparing to the school. My kids are preparing to the school from the 1st of September. And also, like family of my friends and colleagues from Antitila, which are serving with me. So their families also, like in Great Britain and in the western of Ukraine, in a safety place. And it very helps us because we don't need to think about how to secure them. We know that they are in security place and they are under covering of love, and it gives us power to fight much more efficiently.
You must miss them though.
Yeah, of course I must. I didn't saw my kids for 6 months, and I tried to speak with them using the internet, but of course I'm dreaming about the time when they will go back and I will kiss them, hugs them, and what we must to do just to fight for their future. And what we are really doing now, we're not just only fighting for future of our country, we're fighting for future of our kids, our children in this country. And this understanding helps me to do this. This understanding helps me to resist, and also helps to resist my friends and my colleagues from Antitila, who are serving with me. And it's unbelievable that it can happen now in 2022, that because of will of one big terrorist named Putin, because of will of nation he represents, and millions of Ukrainian people must be separated thousands of people killed, and it's unbelievable that it's happening now in present times. And I want to say thank you for whole freedom world that's supporting us and taking care of our refugees. It is a very big pleasure for us to understand that whole freedom world is standing by Ukraine and helping Ukraine.
Taras Deplia, thank you very, very much for talking to us.
Thank you for calling.
Well, governments, businesses and families worldwide are feeling the economic impact of the war, from famine in Africa to soaring energy costs. Europe is on the brink of recession and there's a long, dark winter ahead. Sarah Hunter is a senior economist with KPMG and Keir Giles is a senior consulting fellow of the Russia and Eurasia program at the Independent Policy Institute, Chatham House. Welcome to both of you. Sarah, can I begin with you? How hard is this conflict biting in an economic sense elsewhere in the world?
It's certainly spreading far and wide. In fact, we are feeling the impact here as well, of course. But you pointed out Europe, and they're certainly seeing most of those spillovers clearly coming through in terms of fuel prices, natural gas prices in particular. But it's also spilling into food prices and also into the manufacturing supply chain. Ukraine was a major producer of car parts, for example, and so car producers in Europe are being impacted by that. So the ripple out effects are spreading everywhere globally, but Europe, perhaps unsurprisingly, is the most directly impacted.
And does it follow that the longer this conflict goes, the worse those problems become?
Well, I think that there's a bit of adaptation that can happen over time, and we're already seeing that around the world in terms of global fuel supplies and responses to that. For example, Europe looking to secure other supplies for natural gas. Indeed, one of the first shipments from Australia arrived in the UK just a couple of weeks ago. So there are ways of adapting, but it is going to be certainly get harder in the near term, particularly as you highlighted with the winter coming up, when fuel demand is highest and there's no getting away from that seasonal impact. So the next few months certainly are going to be pretty tough in that part of the world. How
pressing is the onset of winter for the shape of this conflict and the way people feel about it?
Hard for me as an economist, I think, to comment on that, but I can certainly see in terms of where fuel prices have moved to and looking at the seasonal patterns of consumption, we know it's going to get tougher for Europe. Indeed, we can almost see the flip side of that over here, where we've had troubles in our own electricity market locally. Partly that's been a result of the movements in gas and coal prices domestically, and that is related to what's happened in Ukraine. And it's most acute in our winter because that's also when we consume significant amounts of energy, and it's been a cold winter here as well. So we can look at that. It's a much less extreme version. It's a lot warmer here than in Europe, but you can see that, and then you can sort of map that through, and it's going to be enhanced and a much larger an impact there because the fuel price movements are that much bigger.
Keir, how straight a line can we draw between public sentiment and the sort of economic conditions we're seeing right now?
Well, it's absolutely right that winter is going to be the test because of the spikes in prices that are already feeding through into cost of living crises across Europe. And Ukraine fatigue, now as it was since the very beginning of the crisis, is going to be Ukraine's biggest challenge, keeping its backers in the West on side to make sure that they can withstand both the military and economic pressure from Russia. Let's not forget they're keeping up a stranglehold on Ukraine's economy as well, so that Ukraine can continue to function as a state and can continue to fight. It's the front line for the whole of Europe, and the longer Europe realizes that and keeps the support going, the better for all of us.
The sanctions against Russia have been part of the censure by the international community. Who is that affecting, and are people in Russia drawing a straight line between the conflict in Ukraine and the conditions they're experiencing domestically right now?
Well, we shouldn't forget that the information picture within Russia, the picture of the war and of the world outside that people see, is very, very different from what we get from independent media. There's such a total control now, not only on the sources of information that are reaching ordinary Russians, but also what they're allowed to say about it and what they're allowed to discuss and repeat, that we shouldn't assume that anything that is happening in the outside world is actually filtering through. It's very easy for Russia to reinvent the reasons why Russians find their standard of living slipping, and to reinvent anything that happens in Ukraine as a victory. They've already redefined several times what they actually want to get out of the conflict, scaling back their ambition again and again, and it's very simple for them to declare at any point that, yes, they're succeeding.
Kira, in the last few days, Ukrainian fighters have made some significant headway in Crimea. How symbolic is that strategically that they managed to inflict such damage in relative strongholds for the Russians?
It's really important. It's one of the turning points in the war, and we've seen several of them so far. And it demonstrates a couple of things, not only the fact that Ukraine can reach far behind Russian lines to target military equipment and infrastructure that previously Russia might have thought was safe, but also the psychological impact, because now Russians, including those who were on holiday in Crimea and fled the beaches seeing Ukrainian attacks, are being confronted with the reality of the war, that their state media and state television are pretending are what they call a special military operation, and also pretending that Russia is winning. So it's that kind of impact with reality that is going to change minds and shift opinion in Russia, and Ukraine is delivering it expertly.
And so we've got this two-pronged approach from people in Russia seeing this impact in Ukraine, plus the economic picture. How badly is that affecting people in Russia, Sarah?
Well, it's certainly starting to squeeze and bite. We can see that in the data that's coming through, although actually perhaps the impact is less, the immediate impact was less than we first anticipated. I think, though, what we can see from history and through time again is that the impact of these sanctions, as they're maintained, it builds over time. It gets harder and harder to maintain, and it will become perhaps more obvious through time, certainly in terms of the data and activity levels. So assuming there's no let up in terms of the sanctions, then it will continue to get worse in Russia, as it will more challenging in Europe and around the world.
Keir, how unified is NATO on the definition of where this conflict should end, whether it's some kind of negotiated settlement and a lingering Russian presence in Ukraine being contemplated for the sake of ending this war?
Well, NATO and, in fact, Europe as a whole, whether in NATO or not, has split along traditional dividing lines. It is always the frontline states, the ones bordering Russia, that recognize the threat and recognize the challenge, plus their sympathizers in the Nordics and in the English-speaking countries. And then in between all of those, you've got the blob of Western Europe. You've got France, Germany, Italy, Spain, that are insulated from the problem by distance and would rather prefer to go back to business as usual. But what most countries in NATO and in Europe still are realizing is that if you do pressure Ukraine to make concessions, to find some way of trading land for peace, as it's been explained, that is in effect a surrender. And it's also encouragement to Russia, because it provides Russia with a success which will just persuade them that, yes, this is the tactic to take in the future again.
Keir Giles and Sarah Hunter, thank you both.
Thank you.
The invasion of Ukraine is not the first war being fought on social media, but it's certainly the most viral. Ian Garner is an expert in Russian war propaganda. We spoke earlier about the failed assassination attempt on one of Russia's most prominent propagandists, Alexander Dugin, an attack that killed his daughter.
There are lots of rumours flying around about why this might have been done, who might have done it, and what the object might be. But really the importance for me is how the Russian state media and nationalist networks are using either the attempt on Dugin's life or the actual murder of his daughter to bolster their claim that Ukraine is not just something that needs to be invaded, but an active threat that is seeking out Russians, that is seeking to destroy Russia within Russian territory itself, and therefore that this is a war of defense.
Why is that narrative useful to the Russians?
Well, that narrative of defense summons up memories of World War II, and the Russians over the last 20 years have increasingly built a kind of cult-like religion around the Second World War, when Russia and the Soviet Union genuinely were invaded by Nazis, who of course carried out a brutal campaign. Something like 25 million Soviet citizens died. And by claiming that this is a war of defense against Nazis, Russian propagandists are trying to say, we're the victims here. This is something that's being forced on us, and therefore the sacrifices that you're being asked to make at the front, and we're seeing, huge troop losses on the Russian side, are justified and necessary because we're reliving this historical moment again.
How is the killing being explained to the Russian public?
Within hours of the news breaking, Russian propagandists, some of the leading figures who are appearing on state television channels, were already saying that this was the work of Ukraine, often linking Ukrainian planning to support from Western spy agencies, the British, the Americans, sometimes the Germans as well. And since then, they've come up with this story that the state security services have discovered that the perpetrator was a Ukrainian citizen who was linked to the Azov battalion, who turned up in Russia with a 12-year-old daughter in tow, managed to carry out this execution, and then disappear across the border to Estonia. And that, for obvious reasons, just doesn't really pass the smell test.
There's been a concerted campaign of silencing opposition to the war inside Russia. What is the state of that resistance right now?
It seems to me that the opposition is more fragmented today than it really ever has been before. We saw that initial wave of protests where there was something like 15,000 arrests in the days after Moscow invaded in late February and early March. But since then, with a series of high-profile court cases, a lot of coverage of fines handed out, jail terms for supposedly slandering the Russian army. Of course, the ways in which one would slander the Russian army in Russian territory are somewhat distinct from the truth. The opposition has found itself not just struggling to gather any momentum, but struggling to even find ways to talk about the war in its own Telegram networks, social media channels, and so on and so forth. So really, they're in a parlous state, and in a state that I haven't seen for a long, long time.
And so should we count that as a victory for Russian censorship?
I would say that this is a huge victory for Putin's surveillance network and for the network of what we can call kind of informal fear, the fear that ordinary people have that they're being watched, that they never know when they might be saying the wrong thing to somebody, whether online, whether in a classroom, whether behind closed doors in an apartment. That's an extremely worrying situation, because if the state doesn't have the full surveillance capacity to really monitor everything that's going on within or behind closed doors, ordinary people believe it does.
The Ukrainian narrative has been one of unlikely victories, smart combat and even phantom warriors. Is that now undermined by the relative stagnation of this war?
Well, I think there is danger that stagnation on the battlefield will mean that the narrative becomes undermined. And so the challenge that the Ukrainian authorities face is to continue to manufacture victories and to manufacture stories about those victories. But that said, if there was any doubt before February the 24th that Ukraine as a nation really maybe had some myths and stories that could unite the population, that's all gone now. We've seen the story of a nation being born at the front, lightning speed, online, on social media, led by the government in a really savvy and clever way, and that's not going anywhere.
Dr. Ian Garner there. The United Nations claims any attacks on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant would amount to suicide and spark another disaster like the one at Chernobyl. Mariana Bajerin is a nuclear expert and senior research associate at Harvard University. She joins us now. Mariana Bajerin, welcome to the program. How great is the risk of a nuclear catastrophe in Europe right now?
Well, it's too great for comfort, to be honest. The thing is, we really don't know, and it's difficult to estimate all of the risks, all of the things that could go wrong, because, of course, none of the systems, the very robust safety systems and protocols that do operate at a nuclear facility like the Zaporizhzhia power plant, none of them were designed with a war zone in mind. So we have the technical part of the story, right? Whether critical systems might be damaged in the shelling, and power, for instance, might be cut off to the plant, endangering the functioning of these critical systems, such as cooling system to the reactor core and the spent fuel pools. But there's also a salient human part of all of this. These safety systems are only as good as the people who operate them. And we know for sure that the Ukrainian staff at the Zaporizhzhia are working under really difficult physical and psychological conditions. They're basically carrying out all this important work under the barrel of the gun.
What would it take to breach the containment buildings, which are described as relatively modern compared to Chernobyl? What are the greatest risks then?
So, of course, yes, the reactor core is covered by a robust reinforced concrete containment chamber that in theory should withstand a crash of, say, a jet airliner into it. But it's not designed for modern precision weapons. We don't know whether there might be vulnerable points, vulnerable places where a well-aimed strike could actually breach that building. The breach of the containment chamber itself does not automatically spell disaster. There has to be a core meltdown. And that is likely to happen if the cooling system that keeps that reactor at a certain temperature, keeps that nuclear reaction at a certain level, that system is compromised. And that could happen in a number of ways. So I mentioned the cutoff of electricity supply to the station. For such occasions of the loss of offsite electricity, there are backup systems. There are diesel generators that could run and power the pumps basically for some time. But that also depends on the supply of diesel fuel at the station. And we don't know how much there is right now, nor do we know that the Russian troops have not gotten into that supply, right? So there's a lot of variables. And the lack of reliable information is part of the challenge here.
If there were to be a breach of this and a radioactive cloud were to be released, how large would it be? What countries would be affected?
That will largely depend on the weather, where the prevailing winds blow. And let me mention that it's not only the meltdown of the reactor core. There's a number of spent fuel pools. If they are drained and that fuel is heated up, then there could be a spent fuel fire. And of course, when there's fire, there's smoke and all of that. The plumes will be also released into the atmosphere. There have been several scientists modeling some of these effects. And the plumes could blow either to Turkey across the Black Sea, for instance. They could blow to Russia. They could go and affect Central and Northern Europe as well, as we have seen happen with Chernobyl.
Is it your assessment that the Russians, the Russian leadership, the Russian soldiers who are in Zaporizhzhia and the other nuclear plants right now, that they understand those risks?
One hopes, but it certainly seems that whoever is running the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the Russian military authorities, like those that have occupied the Chernobyl zone earlier in this war, that they have a very dim view of what it takes to safely operate a nuclear power plant. So I would not place a great confidence on what these people know. Some of the younger soldiers we have gotten accounts after Chernobyl was liberated in March, that they never heard of Chernobyl, some of these people. So it's a different generation, and they're from a different sort of class of people, as it were, or social strata that might not be educated to the extent that would provide them with that knowledge. So I think this is why the role of the international community and the IAEA important in keeping attention and bringing the international focus to what's going on at Zaporizhzhia.
Mariana Bajiran, great to have you on the program. Thank you.
Thank you.
The war sparked a humanitarian tsunami of refugees streaming into Europe, and there are grave fears the colder months and the stalemate in the war will force more Ukrainians to flee their homeland. Achille Dupre is with the Red Cross in Kyiv.
basic and essential items can be very hard to come by, including food and water, especially in areas close to the fighting. We've seen schools, healthcare facilities, and homes and other critical infrastructures, such as water infrastructure, severely damaged or destroyed. And we've seen, for example, hospitals that simply don't have enough supplies to save lives. And, people have had to leave everything behind to escape. Many are experiencing a huge amount of trauma, and they need urgent assistance.
I'd like to introduce you now to Irina Domorodska. She left Ukraine just days after Russia invaded. She's now living in Bendigo, Victoria. Irina, welcome to the program. Tell me, what has life been like for you coming to Australia?
Well, I just arrived 3 months ago to Australia. When the war was broke, we had to move quickly to Europe because it was dangerous to stay there. And thanks Australian government, we had an opportunity to come here as tourists so quickly and then apply for humanitarian visa, which give us permission to work and study here for 3 years.
Was it difficult for you to decide to leave Ukraine?
Yeah, sure, because my family is still there. My brother and my nephew are militaries and they should protect our country. My whole family is there and I'm just alone to arrive here. It was a very difficult step in my life, but I got decision and moved here.
How do you feel about them staying in Ukraine and fighting?
It's a very difficult topic, and this is an important day in every Ukrainian life, especially during such a difficult time. And it's not so easy for people who are staying there, but we truly believe that we will our freedom, and we are very proud to be Ukrainians.
How do you feel about Independence Day right now? It's a cause for celebration, but a lot of sadness too because of what's happened in the last 6 months, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not only about 6 months. I need to tell you that it goes during centuries. And Ukraine, yes, today celebrate 31 years of independence and several centuries of struggle, growth, and the identity of the Ukrainian culture and nation. So it doesn't happen yesterday. It doesn't happen only 6 months ago. It happened by centuries. And it started totally in 2014 and continued just 6 months ago, 24 February. And unfortunately, you can see that it continues till nowadays. But we truly believe for help Europe and other countries like Australia, that they help us, and we will live also healthy and normal life.
Did you get a moment to pause and celebrate and to reflect about your own Ukrainian citizenship today?
Yeah, we totally gathered together, for singing songs, just like that, not for dancing or just, it's like just celebrating and just staying together, just for supporting our people who are staying and protect our country right now there.
Have you managed to connect with other Ukrainians now living in Australia?
Yeah, sure. Nowadays it's totally 5,200 people arrived to Australia and continue to arrive. And yes, we are in a good contact with them.
Is there a sense of kinship among you? What is it like to have each other's company and to support each other at this time?
In Australia, there is a very big Ukrainian community which support us, and they gathered us together, and we are trying to help each other.
Now,
so it's all sense of this Ukrainian community.
Tell me about what you're doing with your life, how you're rebuilding here in Australia in this time.
Since your Australian people I can rebuild and somehow restart my life. I will never ever forget to give thanks tons of Australia's people who opened their hearts and souls to us, because without them, I'm telling now about myself, I cannot restart my life here. Really thanks everyone who reached out, called, text me when I needed it the most. Thanks people who pulled me out of the house, brought a smile to my face when everything was grey. And I will not forget to thank everyone who listened to me when I needed to release all my sorrows, who helped me to type their hearts to make me happy.
Irina,
and easy
thank
my
you. And that is the programme.